When I was 12, me and a group of friends would play hide and seek in these woods that were on the edge of our neighborhood. We would always play around 6, but had to be home by 10:30 on the latest on the weekend. And we weren't allowed to go so far that we couldn't see our houses. Those are the only rules our parents had set for us. Well, one Friday, we were out playing in the woods as usual, and I, for whatever reason, decided to go deeper in the woods. I can't remember how far I went into those woods, but what I do remember is coming across an old shack. I considered using it as a hiding place, but then I thought that they wouldn't come this deep in the woods to look for me, so I decided to head back. However, when I started to head back, I turned my head to look at the shack one last time, and for a split second I saw someone peeking out the door. Whoever it was quickly turned their head back when they saw me. I didn't pay too much attention to it and headed back. About halfway through the walk, I hear, "Psst! Hey kid, come over here." I looked back and saw an old man hiding behind a tree, gesturing to me to come to him. I knew better and took off running. While I was running, I heard him yelling, "Wait! Stop!" And I could also hear the sounds of his footsteps running after me. When I got to the end of the woods, I ran into my friends who were wondering where I was. I told them to get out of the woods and we ran to our friend's house. I told them what happened and eventually I told my mom what happened too. Our parents called the police to search the woods for the old man, but I don't know if they ever found him or not. Our parents never let us play in those woods ever again after that, but even if they had, I would never go back. Old man living in the shack in the woods? Let's not meet again. This incident just occurred a few hours ago, and it is still making my head spin. Forgive me if it seems lengthy, but it's an awful lot was said. My mother, sister, and I, female and 18 years old, were shopping at our local Target. As we stroll around, I recognize a girl named Stacy, also 18 years old, that I used to go to high school with for reference. I dropped out of high school my senior year, so I haven't been in my old high school or seen anyone from there for about a year now. I simply glance at her and keep on moving, doubting that she recognized me because I haven't been in school for a year. A few minutes later, I am on the complete opposite side of the store when I see the girl again. Like last time, our eyes awkwardly met and I tried to walk past her, but this time she actually said something. "Hey, didn't we play tennis together?" Stacy spoke with wide eyes and a painfully large smile. There was a girl standing next to her, but I didn't recognize her. I simply said a yes in response. I was never friends with her in school. In fact, I never talked to her or even liked her. That's when she introduced herself, as if I completely forgot who she was. She goes on to question if I still went to high school, in which I explained that I graduated early with online classes. The conversation started out normal. I thought it was simply us catching up due to the fact that I had been absent from school. I kept wanting to cut the conversation short, but Stacy kept prodding about what I was doing now. Am I in college, and what was college like? Harmless questions. In fact, I didn't mind answering her questions. Then the conversation took an unexpected twist. Stacy somehow weaseled the conversation into one about God and Christianity. For reference, I do consider myself a Christian, but not one of those hardcore ones who are constantly spewing Bible quotes at strangers. She asked if I attend church, to which I responded with yes. Her eyes became even wider and her smile even bigger. Her whole mantra of God sounded like this. Back in my high school days, I was always partying and being so happy, but that was all fake, and no one actually knew I was pretty sad. That's when I found this church that showed me God's way and His undying love. He accepted me, and He'll accept you too. Now, I am always happy, for I have God on my side. And at this church, God truly appears before your very eyes. He cured me of my physical and mental ailments, like when I messed up my knee in tennis. The whole time Stacy spoke, there was just a robotic tone about it, as if these words were memorized, practiced, and rehearsed. There was almost no genuine emotion in her, just wide eyes and a never-failing smile. Then her friend, Ashley, late teens or early 20s, began her speech. Keep in mind my mother and sister are just an aisle away, waiting on me. Ashley's speech went like this. For a while in life I suffered with depression and suicide. I was always faking to be happy until I found this church. The church truly opened my eyes and heart. I no longer feel dead inside. This is when she hinted that maybe I feel dead inside too, and the only way to recover from it was to look to God. Ashley also used the word zombie to describe this dead feeling, and that's when I began to really think that there's something wrong with these girls. Ashley continued on saying, I don't think it is a mere coincidence that we ran into you. God led me to you. He wanted me to reveal to you the way, God put me a vision in my head of you opening a present, and that present is our Lord and Savior. She kept on ranting how this is destiny that we met, and that God put Stacy and Ashley in my path to reveal himself to me. When Ashley mentioned depression and suicide, I could not help but to believe her for a slight second. I've been struggling with depression for years, but kept it quiet. And with me being a believer of God, I was almost fooled into thinking that this is a sign from God telling me to finally open up and get help. But when Ashley began to ramble about her church, that foolish hope I had dissipated quickly. Then the two moved the conversation onto their church. They kept stating that it was not a normal church, and that God himself in flesh and blood came to them at the church. They informed me that God came to them to heal them of misery and grief. Ashley then pulled out a business card which had the church's email, a Bible quote, and her personal phone number before the anticipated departure. They kept saying how cool I am and that they are glad they met me. Then we finally parted ways. I remember my legs being extremely weak when I walked away. That's when in my mind it clicked. Are they part of some cult? Their mannerism and behavior seemed too scripted to be real. That's when my sister found me and answered my suspicions. Apparently before I had to endure that 10-minute chat with Stacy and Ashley. My sister overheard the girls were having the exact same conversation with another girl on the opposite side of the store. So this was all scripted, and it was their way of luring and persuading strangers to join their church. I realize now that how they do it too. To reel me in with their discussion, they discussed about my absence from school and experience in college. To reel in the other girl they talked with, they started by complimenting her outfit and inquiring about her artistic hobbies. I wonder how many people they ended up talking to, and if they were just walking around the store hoping to find easy targets to talk to. I have so many questions, and that's what bothers me the most about this. And being that somewhat religious person I am, their talk of God unnerved me. Is it some sort of humorous to think of now? Simply because I think crazy God lovers are comical? But I'm still bewildered. If you have any information about how cults operate and how they coax people into joining them, please let me know. Does this incident sound like cult members trying to spread their message, or harmless teenage girls simply spreading the love of God? If you have any other questions about what occurred to my interaction with them, please ask. Also, it's possible that I will see Stacy again because she's attending my college next semester. Although Stacy and Ashley seemed harmless and just overexcited about God, I honestly hope that we never meet again. Back in college, I was working in my hometown during the summer, and since my parents had moved out of town, I was staying with my best friend's family. I practically grew up in this house, and his family was like mine, and mine like his. One night after work, his little brother and I rented some movies and stayed up late watching them in their finished basement. Around 11 p.m., his brother went upstairs to bed, and I continued watching until I fell asleep on the sectional. The basement, although finished, was a little eerie at night. Two massive sliding glass doors looked out to the thick northern Wisconsin forest. Most nights the moonlight casted a soft glow around the thickets that created an odd comfort of cozy country warmth, but never let you forget how much untamed forest is at your doorstep. On this night the curtains were pulled across the sliding doors so only a slightly luminous silhouette could be seen around the edges. I prefer to sleep with the TV off and the covers over my head, so I had to shut off the movie and sank under the blanket in all but pure darkness. A few hours later I woke up on the couch to my best friend's little brother laughing at the movie. He laughed a few times until I said, "Dude, shut up," and then he began to giggle. I heard him get up from in front of the television and make his way towards the sectional. I froze. At this very moment, I remembered my best friend's little brother had gone upstairs to bed a while ago. Someone else was downstairs with me. The voice giggled some more and began dragging its hand across the back of the couch. I told myself that it wasn't really happening and nothing was there. I told myself to get up and turn on the lights. I repeated it. Get up and turn off the damn lights. Nothing is there. I threw the blankets off sternly, walked to the light switch and flipped it on. Nothing was there. I was alone in the basement. I forced myself back onto the couch and I said I had to endure the anxiety and get over it. In the morning when I woke, I re-encountered the story over the phone to my best friend. He paused and it clicked in both of our heads. Years before this, my best friend was sleeping on a pull-out couch in the upstairs living room. He woke up to a little boy laughing and looking at him through the loft railing, at his feet dangling between the wooden posts. Was it the same little boy, or just coincidental acts of sleep paralysis? I'll probably never know. So for some context, I must have been about 4 when this all happened, but I remember it very clearly. I stayed with my grandparents every weekend from about 2 to 6 years old to relieve my mother of some burden. She worked and went to school full time back then, and I have 2 brothers, 11 and 3 at the time, who could be a lot to handle. I was a very quiet kid who had no problem keeping myself entertained, so it was easy for my elderly grandparents to watch me. I've always had issues with sleepwalking, and because of this I had a small child's bed next to my grandparents' bed in their room. One night as my grandparents were sound asleep, I sat in bed and watched their small TV that sat atop the dresser. All of a sudden, the TV shut off. No rhyme or reason. The remote control sat alone on the nightstand next to my grandmother. Oddly enough, I was not frightened by this at all. My child brain simply thought, oh okay, TV is off, must be time to sleep. I lay back in bed and gathered the covers around my neck to get comfortable. Then when I looked back up, I noticed a tall figure standing in the corner of the room, illuminated perfectly by the streetlight pouring in through the window. He was of an average height, however. He was wearing what I now understand to be a cloak. As a child relating the story, I would insist he was wearing a dress, and his face was red with streaks of black that seemed to be flowing down from the crown of his head. I was startled, but again, oddly not afraid by this man in my presence. Despite my lack of terror, I knew this man should not be there, and tried to wake my grandparents, first by calling their names, then jumping from my bed to theirs and shaking them both vigorously. They never woke, and continued to snore lightly. Now the unnatural nature of the situation started to hit me, and I began to worry something was wrong with my grandparents, but I had no regard still for my own safety. I looked back up at the man, and he had a hand outstretched, beckoning, then slowly began to glide towards the door that led out into the hall. After he disappeared out the door, I got out of my bed slowly and began to follow him. To this day, I cannot explain why I did that, other than that I was really just in absolutely no fear of this odd-looking man. I followed him down the hall and into the kitchen. I saw him pass through the kitchen door to the living room, but when I got to the living room, he had disappeared. Now that is when terror hit me. I felt extremely cold and something horrible washed over me. I ran back into my grandparents' room and launched myself into their bed. They immediately awoke, and I told them what happened, to which they both absolutely lost their minds. My grandma turned on all the lights in the whole house. My grandpa searched it top to bottom with a bat. They found nothing, and we all eventually went back to sleep. Around that time, there was a show on TV called Freakazoid, and the boogeyman character was called Candle Jack. So that's what I decided to call my strange visitor. He became somewhat of an imaginary friend after that, although I'm not sure how imaginary he really was. It was right after this that I began to feel presences, and still do to this day. I could always tell when it was Candle Jack specifically who was around, though, and others could tell too. I would tell my grandmother or my parents, "Oh, Candle Jack is here," or would make them set an extra place at the table because he was with me and would need somewhere to sit. I remember very clearly how uncomfortable this seemed to make everyone, particularly my mother, and I learned later in life that it was because they could all feel it too. My brothers would not come near me when I was playing with Candle Jack. My mom said the room would get cold and stale, and she would get a nauseated feeling when he was around. As time wore on, I began to be afraid of this presence and thought that if I didn't do things to make him happy and feel included, he would get angry and hurt me. But I don't remember why or what made me get this idea, even though I still felt him around. I began to tell everyone he wasn't there, or that he went off to college. I persistently ignored him until one day he went away for good. To this day, whenever he is brought up amongst my family, usually after a few drinks, everyone still talked of how absolutely terrified they were of Candle Jack and their separate experiences with him. I will never know if I was visited by something or if it was just my overactive imagination and the power of suggestion that was scaring everyone else, but I hope that I never see or feel him around me again. I come from a family of hunters. It was not uncommon for my mom and stepdad to go out early morning and not come home until well in the night on occasion. In rural Georgia, It was fairly common for landowners to lease out their acres for hunting to different folks depending on the seasonality and the type of hunting they are doing. And deer season for archers begins at the end of summer. My mother has this story that I loved to hear as a child that as an adult had a horrifying twist. One afternoon my parents snuck out to hunt for a day. The land they leased that particular year ran alongside a power line route. These routes are clear to cut through woods and create a man-made field. A hunter can set their tree stands up in the thickets surrounding these fields and wait for grazing animals to come by. Around dusk, my mom started to look out for my stepdad to come and pick her up. He would usually help her get situated in her stand, then go and find his own set up farther down the trail. As the sun began to sink, she saw him walking down through the power line clearing. My stepdad is a brolic type man that has a wide gait in his walk. He swings his arms a bit as he walks. It's kind of similar to a caveman to me. Even in the low sinking light, she could make out his silhouette and could see that he was zigzagging from side to side out of the clear-cut field. He'd obviously forgotten where they had set up their stand and was trying to find her. So she stood up and waved her hands to get his attention. At that moment, the creature she thought was my stepdad noticed her. It dropped down to all fours and darted into the woods, making a strange low growl as it did. She waited for what seemed like an eternity for my stepdad to come and get her. She was terrified and in tears. One night in my teenage years, I asked to hear this story again. My stepdad spoke up, and I was surprised. As a man of few words and a lack of imagination, he raised his head at the dinner table. I've never told either of you this, but I think I probably should. That night, the creature wasn't running away from your mother. I was walking along the line of the woods toward her tree stand when I noticed it. I smelled it before I actually saw the thing. It had a pungent odor, almost like skunk. And it seemed to be a little over 6 foot tall, covered in thick, coarse hair. It saw me about the same time I was drawing back an arrow to take it aim. At first it growled, then dropped to all fours and sprinted towards me as I released the arrow, knocking it in the arm. I was shaking and just missed the intended hit. The animal veered to the side and kept running. To this day, I wonder what that creature was. In 1973, when I was 8, my family lived in an old farmhouse in rural southern Ohio. The closest house was about a mile away. The house we lived in was on a working farm with a barn, a windmill water pump, several acres of fields, a small creek, and it all backed up to a line of trees about a half a mile behind the house. The house was built in the 1850s, had a root cellar and 2 stories. The upstairs had 3 large bedrooms and a small bathroom with an old metal claw-foot bathtub. Wide stairs terminated at the top of the north end of the large landing, and a walkway ran from the top of the stairs along the west wall past my sister's bedroom before turning east. The walkway then passed my parents' room, my room, and then ended at the bathroom. At the landing, the north end, there was a large window. I should mention that the ceiling was about 20 feet tall, so the window on the north wall started about 8 feet above the floor. My room was on the south end of the landing/walkway. One January night I needed to heed the call of nature, so I got up out of bed and walked to the door. Across the upper walkway/landing was a figure. It was about 6 feet tall. Its face was silvery white and glowing. It had spiky lightning bolt-like hair in its body, while bipedal and humanoid, was ill-defined and not glowing. It was standing at the top of the landing, 40 feet away from me, and it was looking at me. I screamed. After what seemed like an eternity, my sleepy parents entered the common walkway area. By this time, the creature had disappeared. My mother sent my dad downstairs to check out the house while she comforted me and checked on my younger sister. My sister slept through the whole incident. I stood rooted to the doorway out of terror while my dad investigated the downstairs. When my dad was downstairs, I heard the sounds of metal banging. It wasn't very loud, but it was loud enough for my mom and I to hear. The sound only lasted a few seconds. When my dad came upstairs, he reported there was nothing downstairs. I asked him what the metal banging sounds were, and he said he hadn't heard anything. I'm not sure, but somehow I managed to go back to sleep that night. I know my mom sat up with me until I did. This is the only time I saw something strange at this house. We moved that summer. from the UK. I was about 11 years old at the time, and I was taking a walk in the woods with a good friend of mine. At the time, I lived in a small village in the south of England. My friend lived in the same village next to mine, and I was over hers for the day. She lived in an old-style Victorian house which was separated from the rest of the village by a woodland area about 2 miles deep. They were and still are quite posh and pretty well off. There was a small country road that went around the side of the woodlands and connected their house and the village. But when walking, we always cut through the woods as it was so much faster. Right at the end of the woods, before the rest of the village, there was a lively yard where there was lots of horses we used to go and sneak apples to and pet, and that day we were on our way to do this. Once we reached around the halfway point through the woods, there was a small clearing in the trees. We stopped to use a rope swing on the edge of the clearing. My friend was pushing me on the road swing when we heard something in the woods howl. I remember distinctively the fact that it didn't sound like a regular dog. I've grown up in a family with lots of large dogs, and it just didn't sound quite the same. It sounds silly, but it just didn't sound right. Normally, I wouldn't really take much notice and pass it off as someone out walking a dog, but I looked, and my friend did too, and they looked nervous and frozen in the same place. They sort of moment when your instincts are trying to figure out whether there's a real threat or not. I don't really know how to describe it, but it just sounded too perfect, almost like it was a fake sound effect being played. We don't have wolves or anything similar in the UK, so it had to have been a pet dog, but it just howled once perfectly, and then it stopped. There was nothing, no barking, no other howls, not even the sound of any movement in the woods. It was just dead silence. After a few seconds, without talking, we both sort of silently agreed to get a move on and not delay any further. We walked onwards without talking. A while later, with about 1/4 of the way left to go, my friend stopped suddenly in front of me, and I pointed to the trees in the distance in front of us. I looked and could see in the distance something that looked like a wolf, but so much bigger, standing and staring right at us. It was a little way away, so I don't exactly have any specifics, but it was at least as tall as my 11-year-old self, each paw planted firmly on the ground. Dark, brown, shaggy body positioned directly at us. Its ears were up, and I remember vividly it had yellow/amber eyes. I know domestic dogs can have light brown eyes that can kind of look orangey, but I've never seen one with yellow eyes, which is something that has always stuck with me. We were sort of stuck there for a while, looking at it until I eventually backed off into the woods. I remember it didn't turn around and walk away. It walked slowly backwards, in a sort of unnatural, uncomfortable way until it was out of view. It just struck me as odd. We obviously weren't a threat to it. It was massive. I also had decided it didn't really want anything to do with us, as it wasn't coming after us. Normally, if a dog isn't interested in a toy, it would just turn around and walk away. But it just backed off unnaturally, like it didn't know what it should be doing. After that, we ran back in the direction we'd come from all that way back to our house. We were much closer to the village, but at that point there was no way we were going to the direction the wolf thing disappeared to. It could have been a normal dog, but the thing is, it was massive, had bright yellow eyes, and no owner in sight. Even if it was a massive stray dog, these sort of things don't really go unnoticed, as unlike places America with lots of wide open spaces, in England you are never more than a couple miles away from somewhere inhabited, and people are always walking through the countryside. So surely anything living there should have been caught at some point, or at least made aware of. As well as this thing, like wolves just don't simply live in the UK, so that couldn't be a possibility, even though it was much larger than any normal dog. If anyone has experienced anything similar to this, or has any sort of explanation as to what it was going on, it would be great to hear your suggestions, and questions are more than welcome. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing and leaving a like for more scary content. I'll see you next time.